Okay. We're now
Wait.
okay. Okay, welcome comrades to this week's Online Communist Forum. Jack Conrad will be speaking on behalf of the PCC. This event is co-sponsored by the CPGB and Labour Party Marxists. This week's theme is Volodymyr Zelensky's victory plan in the Ukraine. Jack will speak for approximately 1 hour, after which we will have a discussion of the themes emerging from his talk. Okay, if you'd like to begin, please, Jack.
Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, well, I will be talking about other things, but in terms of opening, yeah, Vladimir Zelensky's victory plan, and it definitely is a victory plan. It's not a negotiation plan. It's not a peace plan. It's definitely how Ukraine can win this war. And he's been going around the United States. We've seen the meetings with Trump, Biden, Harris, and indeed we've seen him being accused by Republicans of actually acting as a sort of election agent for Harris, which I think is true for reasons we'll come to. But he's also been recently speaking at the NATO summit, and he's also addressed the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, in terms of his victory plan, which consists of a whole number of items. But first and foremost, it's about, let me get it right, getting a formal invitation to join NATO. Now, I'm not quite sure of the ins and outs of this. Suffice to say that Ukraine is already a candidate member. So this clearly isn't about actually joining NATO. It's somewhere between where we are now and full membership. Either way, full membership is clearly ruled out, at least I would guess so at the moment. Why? Because NATO is known for one thing, and I would have thought above all, and that is the old trade union slogan, you know, an injury to one is an injury to all. If you attack one of our members, then you're at war with all our members. And given that there's a war taking place today in Ukraine, if Ukraine was given full membership, that would mean every other member of NATO would be a combatant, would be obliged to become a combatant, with all the consequences that you can imagine. And basically, what that would involve clearly is a situation of who blinks first. Is it Vladimir Putin who blinks in terms of the nuclear threat, or is it the West that backs down? Is it NATO that backs down with the threat of Russian nuclear weapons? But that's why we have this request, demand for a formal invitation to join NATO. Zelensky wants to involve NATO in this war. He wants NATO supplies of weapons, but also, by implication, he also wants NATO boots on the ground. The second item is something we've discussed repeatedly on this forum and repeatedly in recent issues of the paper, and that is Storm Shadow. Not only Storm Shadow, but weapons similar to Storm Shadow. Storm Shadow is a not German, Italian, French, British cruise missile. They describe it as long range, but the reality is something like 155 miles. Either way, they're being used now today. They have been supplied to Ukraine. Ukraine uses them. It's hit targets, for example, in the Crimea and in the east, in Donbass. But what Zelensky wants is permission to use these weapons that he's already got against the territory of the Russian Federation itself. And of course, Putin has responded by saying that if you use these weapons against us in terms of our home territory, then in effect, NATO is at war with Russia. And there's been all sorts of dark, ominous talk about, again, nuclear weapons then coming on to the agenda. Now, my understanding is that the meeting that took place in Washington between Keir Starmer and Joe Biden agreed a, in quotes, strong position. And my understanding, and I think it's correct, is that Joe Biden said, okay, you can give permission if you want it. I give you permission to give permission. So whether the UK has given the go-ahead, we don't know. At the moment, it's denial, but it's not inconceivable. In other words, the first time we discover that the go-ahead has been given, it's quite possible it will be on Russian TV as they show a wreck of some cruise missile with a bit of metal saying made in UK. What seems to be the case, though, is that we're involved in a case of, in a game of chicken. And that is the United States doesn't want to be seen taking the lead in escalating this war. That's been the history throughout the Ukraine conflict. It's wanted a position where it's Germany, it's Britain, it's France that take the lead in escalating things. And so it's basically turned around to Keir Starmer and says, well, you can give the go ahead and you could get together with Italy, you can get together with France. In France, the name of these missiles, it's exactly the same missile, is called Scalp. And there's a huge amount of pressure on Germany to actually supply Ukraine with a missile called Taurus. And again, my understanding is, in terms of the coalition government in Berlin, bizarrely, you might think, it's the Green Party that is the most enthusiastic about actually supplying Taurus. The other parties are more reluctant. I think for good economic and strategic reasons. Either way, this is clearly something that Zelensky is agitating for. My own assessment, for what it's worth, is that while such missiles would make a difference, they won't prove decisive. They're not in and of themselves war winners. And the fact of the matter is that Ukraine has already been using drones all the way north, way beyond 155 miles, against targets in St. Petersburg, Moscow. It's hit oil facilities. And also there's been spectacular pictures of it hitting arms dumps and causing an almighty hell of an explosion, and thereby reducing significantly the supplies of artillery shells, for example, to the Russian front line. We should also add, I think, that American HIMARS, these are not quite the same, but nonetheless, these are missiles that have been used against the territory of the Russian Federation, namely in Kursk. They have used these American missiles to knock out bridges and to knock out pontoons that have been put in place by the Russian forces in order to supply reinforcements to contain the Ukrainian incursion into Russian territory. The third demand of Zelensky is no land trade. And what's that? That's a reference to, we aren't going to engage in, you have Kursk, we'll give you back the territory we hold in Kursk, and we'll take in exchange, I don't know, somewhere in the south. or somewhere in the Donbass. Zelensky is ruling that one out and is saying no land trade, which is, in other words, a formula for saying no peace negotiations. What we demand is the defeat of Russia, is the surrender of Russia in terms of its claims in terms of the Russian parts of Ukraine. The fourth demand of Zelensky, again, this is something he's putting forward to NATO and the Ukrainian parliament, is to continue with the Kursk incursion. Now, I don't really rate that myself. Almost straight away, once the very bold incursion had happened, what you saw on both sides is digging down. So on the Ukrainian side, on their new front line, they started dig trenches, put in place dragon's teeth defenses in, you name it, barbed wire and ditches, tank traps and all the rest of it. And the same was happening on the Russian side. And the Russians have shown no sign of saying, we must take back this precious Russian territory. Instead, they've concentrated on pursuing their offensive in the Donbass. Now, again, I think we all know that in Ukraine, we're now in the midst of the rainy season, the mud season, and that makes fighting extremely problematic, not just because soldiers are bogged down in mud and their trenches flood, but crucially, delivering them the supplies of drones, artillery, shells, food, petrol becomes incredibly problematic because you have to deliver that by truck, by lorry, and the dirt tracks that are there and perfectly serviceable in the winter, they freeze, or in the summer, just become quagmires. And so delivering supplies to the front line means that the difficulties in delivering stuff to the front line mean that the fighting season in Ukraine is basically the winter, but above all, the summer. Either way, Zelensky promises to continue with his Kursk offensive. He also wants some sort of agreement with NATO powers to protect, let me get it right, a non-nuclear package to protect Ukrainian soil. He's not talking about agriculture here. What he's talking about is involving NATO anti-missile and anti-aircraft batteries that you would base in Poland or Romania to shoot down Russian drones and Russian missiles that are over Ukrainian territory. In other words, he wants the direct involvement of NATO powers in the defense of Ukrainian military positions, but also Ukrainian towns such as Kiev and Lvov, for example. He's also saying that he wants joint EU-US protection of natural resources. I'm not quite sure what is meant by that, but again, you see the creep that he's demanding. He's demanding measures that would effectively lock NATO into the Ukraine war in an active fashion rather than simply in an enabling fashion. And the last open demand is that once there's peace, Ukrainian soldiers will be based in other parts of Europe. I'm not quite sure of the significance of that. I presume that this is just simply something that comes with NATO membership and therefore, training, I don't know, in Sweden or on Salisbury Plain or something along those lines, but not insignificantly. And I've not read any commentary on this elsewhere. We have 3 addendums which are kept secret. So 3 secret clauses have been presented to Joe Biden, David Lammy, Macron, Schultz. I don't know what they are. And I've not, as I said, I've not read any commentary that enlightens me. I presume they've been kept secret because, hey, they're dangerous, but that's just me guessing. Now, in terms of the full package, there's absolutely no chance whatsoever of that being accepted at the moment, not least because of the dangers it would involve, but also because we are on the cusp of elections in the United States. So there's no way Joe Biden is going to sign up to that. And quite frankly, I don't see Britain, Germany, France, Italy, and such other countries at the moment taking the lead on this one before the US elections. Nonetheless, what we've had in the past is a similar tussle over the supply of, again, supposedly game-changing weaponry that, of course, doesn't prove to be game-changing, but nonetheless ups the ante, ups the involvement of NATO in this war. And I'll give the 2 examples that I think come to mind here. And that's, first of all, the supply of main battle tanks. Previously, the Ukrainian forces were equipped with Soviet-era tanks, and they demanded up-to-date Western tanks. And America, if you recall, was very reluctant to take the lead. It didn't. It was actually Britain, wasn't it, under Boris Johnson, that took the lead in supplying 12 Challenger 2s, militarily pretty irrelevant. America said it would supply, again, I think, a similar total of Abraham tanks. That's the US equivalent of a Challenger 2. But crucially, it was about bringing Germany on board because it's Leopard 2s made in Germany that most European NATO armies are equipped with. And in terms of getting rid of their old Leopard 2s, that's what's happened, both from Germany, but also from Eastern Europe, countries like Poland, but a whole host of other countries have sent Leopard 2s. The other symbolic so-called game changer that, of course, was never going to be a game changer, and that's the supply of F-16s, American made, but standard issue in Western and now Eastern Europe. This is a 4th generation fighter aircraft, and they're being replaced with 5th generation F-35s. But remember the tussle that there was in order to get these things to Ukraine. Zelensky had to beg, threaten, create. He got them. Have they made a decisive difference? Of course not. Are they being used? Yeah, but over the territory of Ukrainian-held Ukraine. Maybe they shoot down drones. That's all you can use them for. Okay. We also have talk from Lammy and Starmer of Russia's strategic limitations. I'm not convinced on this one. Nonetheless, they talk about Russia only being able to make tactical advances. They say that the logistical restraints, the manpower restraints, means that Russia can't do anything more. There's also talk, which again I think is wild, of the Russian economy just about to collapse. I'm not convinced on either case. Russia is spending a great deal of money, that's true, on arms at the present time, but nothing like the level of arms expenditure of Britain in World War II, which was the highest of any protagonist, or Nazi Germany. And of course, in terms of Britain, It had behind it a global empire. It had an alliance with the United States. Russia doesn't have that. It can supply oil, yes, to China. It can supply oil to India. But is China going to do something equivalent to Lend-Lease that was agreed with Roosevelt, between Roosevelt and Churchill? The answer to that is no. No doubt China is helping Russia out, but it doesn't want to be seen to be too open, too overt in that. It doesn't want to risk retaliatory measures from the US and its allies. Nonetheless, the fact is, and I think this is an accurate description, and it's something that I've been arguing really from the early days, that what I think we see in Ukraine is in essence a stalemate. So yes, you've seen the Kursk incursion, you've seen Ukraine, put on the back foot in the Donbass, but nothing decisive. Nothing that would lead you, at least not me, to the view that Ukraine is just about to collapse, whatever problems they've got in recruitment of, conscripts, or that Russia is just about to collapse. But if things are escalated, if NATO is more directly involved, then that assessment could well change. Which brings me to the US elections and the polling. We all know that when Joe Biden was replaced at the last minute by Kamala Harris, she got an instant honeymoon, a boost, and it put her 4 percentage points ahead of Trump. That honeymoon hasn't lasted long. And what we now have in terms of pollsters in the United States, and this is pretty much across the board from what I can gather, they put Trump 2 percentage points behind now. Now, as you know, in general, Republicans don't need a popular majority. This is not a direct election. So in terms of if we had Harris on 51% and Trump on 49%, that doesn't give it to Harris, because what we're dealing with here is an electoral college, is a vote by states. And of course, what we have is a lot of, actually it's smaller states, and I'm talking about population, in terms of population, not territorial size, that are so-called red states, i.e. Republican states. So, of course, what matters when it comes to the presidential election is these so-called swing states. And therefore, it's worthwhile, at least, looking at the latest, journalistic commentary on what the bookies think. Bookies know a thing or two about politics. They know a thing or two about sport. They know a thing or two about making money. And what they're saying is that they now give Trump a 4 to 7 chance of winning. Now, I'm not a betting man. I don't go to the betting shop and, my horse is on 4 to 7. I sort of have a vague idea what that's all about. But in statistical terms, what that turns out to be is a 63.6% chance of winning. And all you need to do is reverse the arithmetic to see what chance Kamala Harris has. And it's why over recent days, Donald Trump has been baiting Kamala Harris by calling her a loser. You're a loser. You ain't going to win. I'm the winner. And it actually looks like, to me at least, that that's quite conceivable, that we could have a second term for Trump. That's what the bookies are saying, but also recognizing that what we're dealing with isn't the popular vote, but the vote in the swing states. And that is where Trump is out ahead in enough of them at the moment that at least cautiously you can talk about the likelihood now of a Trump victory, not the certainty, but the likelihood. Now, my suspicion is also that there will be what is called shy Republicans. We have it in Britain, shy Tories. So I'm sure the bookies, I'm sure the pollsters try to factor that in. Nonetheless, I think the mood music, the drift of events seem to point to a Trump victory. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, this is why I dealt with these polls, as the tail end of my comments about Ukraine. That could matter big time. Why? Because Trump has at least promised to end the war within 24 hours. I don't think that will happen, but it's quite conceivable that before he's actually sworn in as president next year, January next year, before he has the hand back on the inauguration Bible, he's already on the phone to Zelensky. He's already on the phone to Putin. He's already doing conference calls, with Russian, Ukrainian, and US officials who will staff his future administration. And one would guess that such a peace deal would involve land for land. I can't conceive of it in any other way. You've got to bring both sides together. Trump has the ultimate weapon against Zelensky if he sort of dug his heels in, and that is we switch the tap off. We switch the tap off financially, we switch the tap off in terms of military supplies, and we tell our allies to exactly do that. Now, that could lead you, and again, pure speculation, but it's why things are so unsure at the present, that quite conceivably lead to a situation of where Ukrainian patriots, notice I'm putting quote marks around it, of the Azov type, actually launch a coup against the Jewish traitor Zelensky. That's quite conceivable under such circumstances. It's also not inconceivable that Vladimir Putin looks at the offer and so that's not enough. I don't just want Kursk back. I want a big chunk. Our soldiers, our boys have died for this land. I don't know how many. The figures are, I would guess exaggerated, but nonetheless, tens of thousands, 100,000, maybe a lot more Russians have died. Many more have been, cruelly injured and disabled in this war. Just getting Kursk back is not going to satisfy Putin. And if he did go for such a deal, then the same thing would happen to him that I've speculated about with Zelensky. Someone, in the top circles of the Kremlin will simply shove Putin aside and accuse him either of being too old, incompetent, or denounce him as a traitor. So there's also the possibility, as well as peace in Ukraine, that's conceivable as early as January, perhaps. That's quite conceivable. I wouldn't have thought it will happen in November or December, but I could be wrong. But it's quite conceivable there could be peace in Ukraine. But it's also conceivable that if Putin doesn't play Trump's game, if he doesn't agree to Trump's deal, then Trump goes for something like, not the full package, but for something like Zelensky's victory plan. So there's both possibilities there. There's also the possibility, of course, that Harris wins. There's also the possibility that not getting a deal within 24 hours, Trump just carries on with this never-ending war that we've had in Ukraine, and they just keep supplying the money, they keep supplying the arms with the view of bleeding over a prolonged period Russia white, and eventually triggering some sort of color revolution or palace coup or splitting the regime. We don't know, but there are all these possibilities, afoot with this US election. In other words, this election really does matter, at least in my opinion, when it comes to NATO and Ukraine. I don't think it matters at all when it comes to the grand strategic plans of the USA. And that isn't about toppling Putin. Toppling Putin would be a means to an end. It's not vital, though. But it's China that is the United States' main target. And a deal with Putin or breaking up Russia into a series of neo-colonies, that would be a step in the direction of surrounding China and strangling China. And that is something that Harris, Biden, Trump, the Democrats, and the Republicans all agreed on. In other words, Russia is relatively, although it's armed with nuclear weapons, awesome nuclear weapons, when it comes to the economy, which is ultimately the guarantor of military prowess, it really is a Canada. That's where it actually rates, or a Mexico. I've also heard, figures that roughly its GDP is something equivalent to the Netherlands, a small country, rich country, but nonetheless a small country in Western Europe. Anyway, my point is that things could radically change with the election on November the 5th, but not the grand US plan to defeat the strategic challenge of China. China is the only serious rival to the United States when it comes to productivity. It's still way behind, but there is no other serious challenger. And so, of course, again, just to make the point, both sides in the United States are also united when it comes to disempowering the possibility of a united Europe under Germany and France. But again, there's everything that tells you that things could radically change. All we need to do is look at Germany at the moment, and there's talk of it being the sick man of Europe. Some liberal commentators find it very hard to explain the rise of the AfD, and you can explain it through migration, and there'll be a big truth there. But it's also the fact that German industry has been sacrificed on the altar of the Ukraine war. And it's worth noting that the left, with hardly any notable exceptions, has failed on the Ukraine war. Certainly the left party, Die Linke, has abysmally failed on the Ukraine war. And it's been the right, it's the Alternative for Germany that's championed the anti-war cause. And I would just say again, I know it is speculation, but it is worthwhile speculating on the level that at least displays how fluid the situation is at the present time. It doesn't take too much in terms of imagination to see the fall of the Scholz coalition government in Germany. I've already marked on the Greens being the most bellicose coalition partner here, but the fall of the Scholz Social Democratic, Green, whatever coalition, its replacement either by an AfD-led or an AfD bolt-on to a conservative, i.e. CDU coalition, which then says, we don't want to back this war. This war is destructive for the economy of Germany and the German economic space. We want to involve ourselves in a deal, not for the victory of Ukraine, but precisely a deal that restores the delivery of cheap oil, but crucially gas, to German homes and German industry. That isn't inconceivable. And that would, of course, be totally upsetting as far as the United States would be concerned. It would be a godsend as far as Putin was concerned. All these possibilities exist, and I'm going to finish with that one. Just moving now, I didn't read the note on the chat. Just moving now to the Middle East, we've had the assassination of Sinwar. Who knows whether it was an accident? Who knows whether the Israelis had electronics, whether they had spies? Who knows? It doesn't matter. What this is another illustration of Israel and its decapitation. I call it a strategy. That what it does with its opponents is knock out the leadership. And it's had a long, long history of doing that. And I read a stupid article in The Guardian, I can't remember by who was trying to sum up was this strategy one that worked, looking at all the examples that this journalist could come up with. So he looked at, for example, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which used to carry out spectacular hijackings and other pieces of political theatre in the 1970s. And it says, well, after Hadid was assassinated, these attacks stopped. I go, yeah, but also, hey, the Soviet Union was the ultimate backer, I think I could be wrong, the ultimate backer. Did it turn off the tap of finances? Did it tell its allies and friends to turn the finances off? And then, of course, you had the collapse of the Soviet Union, and therefore the collapse of the PFLP's global strategy. Maybe that explains it rather than the assassination of one individual. Again, we have the example of the decapitation of Al-Qaeda. Who's heard of Al-Qaeda doing much in recent years? I'm sure it is. I know it exists in Syria, but it isn't carrying out spectaculars. We haven't had another 9/11. Does this prove that decapitation works? I think about it and I go, dumb idea. You got rid of Al-Qaeda as a spectacular, and you gave birth to a split in Al-Qaeda called ISIS, Islamic State, that swept all before it in Iraq and Syria, and basically caused a civil war in both countries. Is that proof that decapitation works? And then you think about Hezbollah, you think about Hamas, and the constant killing by Israel of their leaderships. This is just nonsense to imagine. And seriously, you have journalists, I presume, on I don't know, some sort of news management game, voicing the idea when it comes to interviews. Do you think the assassination of Sinwar will now lead to the release of the hostages and peace talks? I just think that that's absurd. I mean, to even ask the question shows a profound stupidity, and I do mean stupidity, ignorance of the reality of these politics. Quite the opposite is most likely the case. What you actually have is a martyr. What you have is a hero who resisted Israeli occupation and paid with it with his life. And I'm told, I don't read Arabic, but I'm told that amongst Sinwar's last remarks was he was quoting from Ali. Ali, one of the relatives of the Prophet. This is the Shia side of Islam, and note that most Palestinians are of the Sunni side of that division. He was quoting Ali, and his last words, my one wish is that I die for the cause. He's died for the cause. For his death, there will be hundreds and hundreds of recruits, not only in Gaza, but also on the West Bank, also in Lebanon, also in Jordan. That's the truth. And we've seen no evidence of this decapitation strategy working. What we've seen, though, of course, is a shift in terms of the resistance away from al-Fatah, who surrendered, away from leftist organizations like the PFLP and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, over to the Islamicists. There's no law there that says that that has to be the case, but clearly resistance is going to take some form. And if the secularists cease resisting, then resistance will look for other avenues. And that isn't something decided by this or that leader. It comes from the objective situation itself. So I don't know where this idea comes from, but it seems to me that it owes more to James Bond films, Western movies, British, cheap cheap fiction, about Mr. Evil, Fu Manchu, the guy with the black hat that's responsible, Sherlock Holmes with Moriarty, the Napoleon of crime. You can put down crime in London, global crime even, to one man. You get rid of one man and you solve the world's problems. Unless, of course, you get a James Bond movie of where Mr. Evil shoots off into space in order to keep the franchise going for the next film. But they seem to have internalized that sort of idea that if you get rid of this individual or that individual, you solve it. It's got nothing to do with evil individuals. It's called occupation. It's called colonialism. It's called expansion. It's called oppression. And where you've got expansion, where you've got colonialism, you will have people resisting, and new people will come and replace old leaders. And if you wanted to negotiate, all I would say is that the people you would choose to negotiate would be people with experience, people who maybe got some gray hair, but also have got political knowledge, aren't there to prove themselves. They've proved themselves. They're the people you want to negotiate with. But clearly Israel doesn't want to negotiate. All this stuff about hostages. If anything, when I heard the BBC ask this question, seriously ask this question, I in my own head thought to myself, well, Hamas is much more likely to take out 10 or 20 hostages from its tunnels, if they're in tunnels, and I suspect some of them are, take them outside and execute them in revenge for the death of their leader. Now, we haven't had that, but that is much more likely than they hand them over and they say, we surrender and we're going to go to Abu Dhabi or, wherever Israel says that you can go. It ain't going to happen. And so what we have, of course, I don't think, I'm not going to speculate, but what we have, ironically, I'll put it no stronger than that, is Hezbollah launching off 3 cruise missiles south, targeting one of Netanyahu's 3 houses, and this was his house in Caesarea, which I think, from my memory of Roman Palestine, is in the north of Israel. Either way, they hit the house. 1 missile got through, 2 were shot down. Not 1 missile, what am I talking about? 2 drones were shot down, 1 gets through. And what does Netanyahu say? This was a grave mistake. A heavy price will be paid. So what is Israel going to do? bombard southern Lebanon. Maybe it will bomb southern Lebanon. Maybe it will send some cruise missiles off to knock out Hezbollah leaders in Beirut. Maybe it will send its army and its tanks in to southern Lebanon. They already doing that. What is Israel going to do that it isn't already doing? That, of course, isn't the case yet with Iran, and we don't know. None of us know. Netanyahu presumably does. Joe Biden presumably does, but maybe he doesn't. What Israel actually decides to do in terms of its retaliation. We've got a little black box on the back of our paper saying that the promise is not to attack Iran's nuclear facilities, not to attack its oil facilities. But do you trust Netanyahu? Do you trust Netanyahu in the run-up to the US presidential elections? Because while no doubt Zelensky is praying on his knees for a Harris victory, there can be no doubt that Netanyahu, in his turn, is on his knees. I know he's an atheist, but nonetheless, he will be on his knees praying for a Trump victory, because Trump says none of these crocodile tears while we supply Israel with F-35 shells, missiles. No, Trump says finish the job. And what I take by finishing the job isn't simply taking out Hezbollah or Hamas leaders. I take this as the second Nakba. I take this as finishing the Palestinian job. I take this not only in terms of taking out Hamas from the south, i.e. Gaza, but also the West Bank, by getting rid of the population. Okay, you dump them in Egypt, you dump them in Jordan, but that is something that Netanyahu wants, that's something his coalition partners want, that is something Zionism want. And in the process, what you do, again, the Mr. Evil side of it is you try to take out the Iranian regime. I'm not convinced by their ability to do that through bombing. They're not going to invade, and I'm not talking about Israel here. The United States is not going to do the equivalent job to Saddam Hussein. It's a very different kettle of fish compared with Iraq. Okay, what time have we got? 48, 10 more minutes or thereabouts. I do have a fun time. I like listening. Well, I don't actually. Me and the BBC, I'd finished breakfast and I'm listening to the 1 o'clock. Yes, I'm a night owl. I'm listening to the 1 o'clock Radio 4 World at One. And we have a reporter saying that David Lammy is in China at the moment talking to the deputy premier and the foreign minister. And they're talking to China about Britain's long and difficult relationship with China. My ears pricked up. And then the reporter said, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, human rights. And I guffawed spontaneously and for a long time. And I just went, are you kidding me? Long and fraught. You know, what do you get taught in school? What did you get taught? Did you go to university? You know, what sort of knowledge of history? What sort of knowledge of British history have you got, let alone Chinese history? If you talk to any Chinese child and you said, what about Britain's long and fraught relationship with China? They would nod their head. And what they would say is the first Opium War, the second Opium War, the 100 years of humiliation inflicted by Britain, Germany, Japan, the colonial powers that humiliated China actually for well over 100 years. I think the first Opium War, I got it written down here, so I know, began in 1839. China's humiliation from its point of view, and I am talking about millions of them, and therefore a billion, and I can say that pretty safely, The humiliation began not just with the Opium War, but before it, but it ended in 1949 and the declaration of the People's Republic of China by Mao in Tiananmen Square. That will be seared onto the minds of every Chinese person. And British people, when they talk about Hong Kong, should ask themselves how the hell Britain got this colony. It was granted, not out of generosity by China, it was granted under coercion. It was gained by Britain through force. And what was the Opium War about? Well, of course, it was about Britain exporting a dangerous drug to China that the Chinese government wanted to restrict. And it was about balancing the books of the British Empire. So when David Lammy goes to China and complains about a fraught relationship and human rights, at least have some sort of knowledge of what Britain did to China, the millions of people that died as a result of colonial oppression and starvation that was imposed on China, not just briefly, but over a whole historic period. So yeah, a century of humiliation, that should be remembered. Okay, just in my last couple of minutes, Anne, I wanted to talk about developments on the left in Britain. Rarely do I look at the SWP's pre-conference bulletins. They have 3 of them in the run-up to conference. When I have in the past, barring quite some time ago, I've just been amazed by the low level of politics on display. The Central Committee's documents are turgid. They're more at the level of journalism than they are of thinking. It makes sad reading. You get the usual dissidents with their particular hobby horses. But this time, I actually did have an interesting read. I'm in the process of finishing an article on the F word, fascism. We've got, as will be announced by Comrade Anne at the end of the meeting, we've got the Stand Up to Racism demonstration in London next weekend. It looks like it will be big. This is to show how many people Stand Up to Racism can mobilize compared with Tommy Robinson, who's recently launched his bestseller book, Manifesto. I'm sure there'll be a lot more comrades from the left. Either way, what the SWP wants to do clearly, and it states it, so it's not me making it up, it wants to channel the huge demonstrations that there have been in London almost every other week since October the 7th. It wants to channel solidarity with Palestine in the direction of what it would call anti-fascism, i.e. its Popular Front Stand Up to Racism campaign. And there we have a problem. Why? Because in the name of broadness, which is the sort of defining characteristic of a Popular Front, in Scotland and elsewhere, but most notoriously in Scotland, what the SWP have defended, what they promoted is broadness to the point of where on their Stop the Stand Up to Racism demonstrations, Zionists have been included. Now, I have to say, when I've been on demonstrations over recent years, I am talking about recent years, I have sort of double taken when I look at Stand Up to Racism banners, because I've looked at their slogans and it says no to Islamophobia. I'm going, yeah, sure. Refugees are welcome here, or something like that. Well, okay, And then it has no to anti-Semitism. And I go, well, yeah, I can see what they mean. But this was in the middle of the witch hunt in the Labour Party. Couldn't you put it in a different way? It certainly struck me as dovetailing in with the establishment attacks on the left and Corbyn in the Labour Party, and how they generalised that out to attack all manner of anti-Zionist voices in British society. But they, in Scotland, not only had the banner and the slogan, which I'm not happy with. Of course, I agree with it, but it's how you present your politics that is often crucial. What they had is Zionists, with pro-Israel flags and symbols and all the rest of it. And a lot of people on those demonstrations objected. And what we have in the latest pre-conference bulletin, this is the first, as I said, of 3 that they will produce in the run-up to their January 25 conference, is the Central Committee saying that the SWP, and it's true, holds the key when it comes to stand up to racism demonstrations, and we should use it to exclude the Zionists, who clearly are racists. That's the nature of the Israeli project. It is an exclusivist project. It is a genocidal project, and it isn't that. It's certainly a project that involves ethnic cleansing. There's no doubt about it in terms of its history, in terms of its program, and its actions. There's no dispute on that one. So it says we should close these people off. Why? It says because we've been attacked by sectarians on this question. My guess is, and comrades will have to tell me if I'm wrong on this, my guess would be amongst the sectarians, those in the forefront of that, I'm guessing, as I said, would be the RCG, Fight Racism, Fight Imperialism. They would have objected. But also a lot of other comrades on the left in Scotland have objected and have either sought to exclude, to block the Zionists, and certainly have lobbied the organisers. But also, and what is a clincher for the Central Committee, isn't these sectarians, don't care about sectarians. No, it's Ben Jamal and the Palestine Solidarity Campaign that have also been objecting. And they're saying, well, we can't really back your demonstration. Can't speak on your platform if you've got a load of Israeli flags and placards out here. We can't have them on. You can't expect us to channel the Palestine movement in the direction of stand up to racism when stand up to racism isn't standing up to Zionist racism. It's just choosing, it's picking and choosing on the broadness. I'm sure that some Zionists anti-Tommy Robinson. On the other hand, what you'll have on October the 26th is some Zionists joining Tommy Robinson. And certainly Tommy Robinson has no compunction about identifying himself with Israel, having himself photographed with Israeli soldiers. It's true that if you take his latest book, he is against financing, believe it or not, the Nazi Azov Brigade in Ukraine, but he ain't against Israel. He views Israel as a standard bearer of Western civilization. Either way, the SWP, in my view, has been caught by its own petard. The slogan has been as broad as possible, the biggest demonstration. That means including everyone, which is the characteristic of the Popular Front that was introduced by official communism Georgy Dimitrov at the 7th Congress of Comintern in 1935. Fascism was defined as, the dictatorship of the most reactionary, the most aggressive, the most irrational section of capitalism, which gave them the door open to aligning themselves with the less reactionary. And what that meant is liberals, social democrats, but also radicals. So in France and Spain, you saw the official communists not only block with bourgeois parties, you also saw the official communists hold back the popular movement in the name of keeping these forces on board. These forces, Trotsky described them as well. They're the ghost of the bourgeoisie. What was substantial in Spain, what was substantial in France, were the Socialist Party and the Communist Party. And we can get into the details of it, but they were substantial forces. These bourgeois parties were peripheral when it came to politics. But in the name of keeping these forces on board, for example, the Popular Front government in Madrid refused to raise the slogan of independence from Morocco. This is in the midst of Franco launching his counter-revolutionary operation from Morocco using Moroccan troops. So yes, this is popular frontism. Anyway, it isn't only the Central Committee. What we have in pre-conference bulletin number 1 is a whole host of different people. We don't have full names. We have Mike of Walthamstow. We have Rob of Dorset. We have Alex and James of Glasgow also joining in and saying, this is really uncomfortable. This really does not go down well amongst Palestinian activists. And I take my hat off to the left that have raised this issue. We've raised it, but we haven't fought on this issue. So I'm saying that as a self-criticism, and I'm doing honor to those that have aggressively raised it. And as I say, I mean, to my knowledge, the one that I would pick out, could be wrong, is Fight Racism, Fighting PIM. But we also have Candy from Devon objecting. No, we should stick to broadness. That's what we've always been told. The biggest force is possible, and we shouldn't weaken our forces against Tommy Robinson and the far right by dividing Stand Up to Racism along lines of another campaign. I'm guessing, but I think this is my old friend Candy Udwin from Camden. I presume she's retired and got herself a nice little, at least I hope so, a nice little cottage in Devon. Either way, there's argument, and I think that's very healthy. And I'm glad to see that there's some dispute in the SWP. My guess is that the Central Committee will win hands down on this one. I don't think the opposition is serious, but I don't think that the lesson has been learned, and that is, it's not about keeping Jamal and the Palestine Solidarity, Ben Jamal and the Palestinian Solidarity campaign on board. This is the result of the logic of popular frontism that got the SWP, when it was in respect, voting down its own program. Migrants are welcome here. Republicanism, secularism, a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. All of that, the SWP voted down. Didn't they also have with Lindsay German, remember the shibboleth? We shouldn't turn gay rights into a shibboleth. Well, of course we shouldn't turn it into a shibboleth. But what the SWP precisely did is sacrificed or held back on that demand because it would be unacceptable in their own heads to the Muslim Association of Britain, Asian businessmen, but also George Galloway. To keep George Galloway and these forces on board, the SWP was prepared to sacrifice one, what they supposedly stand for principle after the other. Okay, I think, Anne, that will do it.